Welcome to The Explainer. What if one of modern history's biggest political divisions wasn't sparked by a war, but by the rejection of just 3 amendments to a document? Well, today, we're dissecting that critical chain reaction of events that led to Jinnah's 14 points, a manifesto that would forever change the course of the Indian subcontinent. Okay, so let's get right into it. To really understand the 14 points, you have to see that they didn't just appear out of nowhere. No, this was the end of a long chain reaction, a whole cascade of proposals, rejections, and a political gap that just kept getting wider and wider. So our story really kicks off in the late 1920s with a British commission. And the irony here is just incredible. This commission actually managed to unite pretty much all of India's political parties. The catch? They were all united against it. It was supposed to chart India's future, but instead it became this massive symbol of British overreach. So here's a little background for you. Back in 1919, the British passed an act that basically said, all right, we'll be back in about 10 years to see how this whole self-governance thing is going. And, well, fast forward to 1928, and the Simon Commission shows up in India, ready to figure out the next steps for the country's constitution. Now, this commission had 7 members, all of them from the British Parliament. But, the number 7 itself wasn't the problem. The real explosive issue was who these 7 members were. That's right. In a commission that was set up to decide the constitutional future of India, there was not a single Indian representative. I mean, you can imagine how that went over. This was seen as a profound insult, and it sparked immediate outrage and calls for boycotts all across the nation.
And the response was, honestly, pretty remarkable. You had this rare moment of solidarity, where India's major political players, we're talking the Congress, the Muslim League, the Hindu Mahasabha, you name it, they all came together. They were absolutely united in the rejection of this all-white Simon Commission.
So facing this united front, the British Secretary of State for India basically threw down a challenge. He more or less said, oh yeah, if you think you can do better, then why don't you go ahead and draft a constitution that all of India's diverse parties can agree on? We'll consider it. And this was a huge moment, a challenge that forced Indian leaders to really look at their own division.
And you know what? Indian leaders said, challenge accepted. An all-parties conference was called, and a special committee was put together to draft their own constitution. This committee was led by Motilal Nehru, and the document they produced, the Nehru Report, really felt like a beacon of hope for a united, self-governing India.
And this Nehru Report was a landmark achievement. It was really the first major collective effort by Indians to write their own constitution. It laid out this bold vision for a new India, a detailed blueprint for unity. Or so it seemed.
Yeah, about that unity, turns out it was pretty fragile, because as the details of the Nehru Report started getting debated, some deep disagreements bubbled to the surface. And these disagreements created a fracture, a breaking point, really, over the crucial issue of minority rights, especially for the Muslim community.
So picture this, it's December 1928 at a huge all-parties conference in Calcutta. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who's there representing the Muslim League, he doesn't reject the whole report. Instead, he comes to the table with just 3 crucial amendments. Amendments that he felt were essential to protect the political interests of the Muslim minority. And this table here, it lays out the divide perfectly. First up, representation. The Nehru Report offered Muslims a quarter of the seats in the central legislature. Jinnah said, nope, it has to be 1/3. Second, how people get elected. The report wanted joint electorates for everyone. Jinnah wanted to keep the option of separate electorates. And third, power. The report gave any leftover powers to the central government, but Jinnah argued they had to go to the provinces because he feared a powerful center would be dominated by the Hindu majority.
And then came the moment that, you could argue, changed everything. The conference rejected all 3 of Jinnah's amendments. The attempt to find some kind of middle ground had totally failed, and in that moment, that fragile unity just shattered. The consequences were going to be immense.
For Jinnah, that rejection was the absolute final straw. It basically confirmed his deepest fears, that in a united India, run by the rules of the Nehru Report, Muslim political interests just wouldn't be safe. And that moment is what drove him to create his own alternative blueprint, his own non-negotiable set of demands.
So you really have to try and see this from his perspective. This wasn't just a political squabble anymore. It felt existential. He fundamentally believed that in a system of simple majority rule, the Muslim community would always be outnumbered, and their political voice would just get drowned out. Now, whether you think that fear was justified or not, it became the absolute driving force for everything he did next.
So what happens? Just a few months later, in March of 1929, Jinnah comes back with his answer.
he releases his famous 14 points. And this document became the bedrock of the Muslim League's entire platform, a definitive list of non-negotiable conditions for any future talks with the Congress or the British.
And listen, these points were not just some political wish list. They had real influence, real teeth. In fact, many of the core ideas in the 14 points, especially about provincial autonomy and protecting minorities, were actually written right into the next major piece of British legislation, the Government of India Act of 1935. They really shaped what was to come.
And all this brings us back to that one huge lingering question. A boycotted commission leads to an Indian report. The rejection of just 3 amendments to that report leads to the 14 points. It just forces you to wonder, doesn't it? Could a compromise in Calcutta back in 1928 have changed everything? It was a single moment of failed compromise that set events in motion that would completely reshape a subcontinent. It's a question history just leaves us to think about.